"You're just a small-town ER nurse," my mother said, her eyes moving over my scrubs the way you'd look at a stain on a tablecloth. "Colton doesn't have a real career. He teaches middle school in a district that can't even afford new textbooks." She straightened the centerpiece on the dining room table, a massive arrangement of white orchids she'd ordered from a florist in Charlotte for the occasion. "Sinclair's fiancé owns 3 medical imaging clinics. His family has a box at the Panthers Stadium. I will not have you two standing next to them at the rehearsal dinner, looking like you just came off a 12-hour shift." She slid the dinner invitation across the table toward me. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind that costs more per sheet than I earn in an hour. Then she picked it up again, walked to the kitchen, and fed it to the garbage disposal. The grinding sound lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted them. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I'd learned a long time ago that tears were currency my mother knew exactly how to counterfeit. I pulled air in slow, let it out slower, and looked at Colton sitting on the couch across the room. His hands were on his knees. He was wearing the button-down I'd ironed that morning, the dark navy one that made his eyes look the way they do on Sunday mornings when the light comes through our kitchen window and he's reading the paper with a cup of coffee going cold beside him. He looked at the floor. The tendons in his jaw were working hard. I stood up, buttoned my cardigan, and looked at my mother directly. "We'll see you when we see you," I said. She didn't answer. She was already rearranging the orchids. Colton was quiet until we turned out of the subdivision. The engine on our 2017 Civic hummed at the pitch it always does on cold mornings. He signaled the turn even though no one was behind us. He always does that. It's such a small thing, and it hits me differently every time. "You all right?" he said. 2 words. That was Colton. In 4 years of marriage, I'd learned that the man who spent 7 hours a day coaxing language out of 12-year-olds who'd rather be anywhere else communicated the big things in the smallest packages. His 2 words contained the whole question. Not just are you hurt, but are you going to let it break you? And do you need me to pull over? And I want you to know I will turn this car around if that's what you need. I didn't answer. I was looking at his hands on the wheel. He'd dislocated his left ring finger last October, breaking up a fight between 2 8th graders in the hallway outside his classroom. The school nurse had taped it. He never filed an incident report because he didn't want the boys to face suspension and lose their spots on the track team. The finger had healed slightly crooked. He still wore his wedding ring on it. I thought about the day 3 years ago when a parent had shown up at the school in the middle of 4th period, screaming in the parking lot that Colton was a failure, that he was wasting her son's potential, that a man who didn't even earn $50,000 a year had no business shaping young minds. Colton had stood in the parking lot in his corduroy jacket with the elbow patches and listened to every word. Then he'd gone back inside and finished grading the stack of essays sitting on his desk, essays his 7th graders had written about people they admired. 40% of them had written about him. He never told me about the parking lot. I found out from another teacher 8 months later. The Civic's heat kicked on. I pressed my palm against the window and watched the suburban sprawl thin out into the Pineline interstate stretch between my mother's house and ours. There was something she didn't know. Something nobody at that rehearsal dinner knew, and nobody would know unless I decided to tell them. 2 years ago, I was working the overnight shift in the trauma bay at St. Caldwell Regional when a bus went off a rain-slicked overpass on I-77 40 minutes south of Charlotte. 11 people transported. We had 4 attending physicians on shift, 2 of whom were already in the middle of critical procedures. The ER went to mass casualty protocol in under 3 minutes. I'd done the drills. I'd never done the real thing. The 4th patient they brought in was a man, mid-60s, in full cardiac arrest, blunt force trauma to the chest, a hemothorax building fast on his left side. The attending who should have taken him was already elbow-deep in another patient. The charge nurse looked at me. I knew what the look meant. I had the training. I'd been doing this for 9 years. I made the call. I stayed at that man's side for 2 hours and 40 minutes without leaving. I performed procedures I'd never done outside of simulation. I held pressure on a chest wound while a resident ran for a thoracic surgeon who was 4 minutes away. I talked to that man the entire time, even when he couldn't answer, even when all the monitors were telling me he was losing the fight. Because I'd read something once about how hearing is the last sense to go, and I refused to let him think he was alone in that room. He survived. I signed off on my shift paperwork, drove home in the pre-dawn dark, made a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table until Colton got up for school. I didn't tell him what had happened. I just said it was a rough one. I found out 8 weeks later who the man was. My supervisor called me into her office and set a piece of paper on the desk between us. It was a letter, handwritten in a cramped, deliberate script on the letterhead of Holt Sutherland Capital Management. The man's name was Warren Aldridge, retired federal circuit judge, former legal counsel to 2 U.S. Secretaries of Treasury, the architect of a regional hospital endowment that funded the very ER department I worked in. He had 2 requests. First, that I accept a commendation he intended to nominate me for through the State Nursing Association. Second, that I join him for lunch, at my convenience, because he wanted to thank me in person. I wrote him back a handwritten note. I told him I was glad he was alive. I told him the commendation should go to the whole team. I asked him not to make a fuss. He wrote back. We had lunch at a diner on Elm Street in March. He ordered black coffee and a BLT and asked me how I got into nursing and listened to the whole answer. Then he said something I've thought about almost every day since. The people who save lives at 2 in the morning while the rest of the world is asleep, he said, setting down his coffee cup, are the ones the rest of the world has no idea they owe everything to. I asked him to please keep the whole thing between us. He honored that. I went back to my shifts. My mother spent that same spring calling me to complain that Colton's spring break didn't align with Sinclair's bachelorette weekend in Savannah, and that if I couldn't make it, I was clearly prioritizing my husband over family, and that a real nurse wouldn't be working every weekend anyway. The weekend of Sinclair's wedding, I put on my scrubs at 5:45 a.m. and drove to the hospital, not because I was scheduled. I'd traded shifts on purpose, weeks earlier, without telling anyone, because I wanted to be somewhere that made sense to me on a day that didn't. The ceremony was at a vineyard in Iredell County. The venue cost what the school district where Colton taught spent on classroom supplies in a full year. I knew because Colton had mentioned the number once, without any particular bitterness, the way he mentions most facts about the world, like he's just noting it, like it doesn't require editorial, like he trusts you to know what to do with the information. I'd heard about it from my aunt over the phone the night before. My mother had told the wedding coordinator that both her daughters would be in attendance. When the seating chart went out, there were 2 empty chairs at the family table with our names on them. Sinclair had smiled when she heard we weren't coming. My aunt described it as a small smile, the kind that confirmed something she'd already decided. At 11:30 a.m., halfway through a 12-hour shift, I was in the break room eating a granola bar and reading a patient update on my tablet when my phone buzzed. It was a photo from my mother. Sinclair and her new husband, Prescott, at the altar, the vineyard rolling out behind them, the light golden the way it only is in October in the Carolinas. The caption read, "This is what success looks like. I hope you're having a nice time mopping floors." I set the phone face down on the table, finished the granola bar, went back to work. What happened 2 hours later is what I'm still trying to find the right words for. I was in Bay 4 with a 72-year-old woman who'd come in with chest pain that turned out to be pericarditis when I heard the charge nurse call my name from the corridor. Her voice had an edge to it that I'd learned over 9 years to distinguish from the normal, urgent edge. This was something else. I stepped out. She was holding a desk phone receiver against her chest, the old kind we still have at that station, and she said quietly, "There's a man asking for you by name at the front desk. He says it's not a medical matter. He has federal ID." I told her to tell him I was with a patient. She came back 2 minutes later. "He says he'll wait as long as it takes. He also says to tell you it's about Warren Aldridge." I finished with my patient. I walked to the front desk. The man standing there was in his late 50s, a gray suit, a federal Marshal badge on his belt, a measured, flat expression that told me he'd delivered important news to people before and knew how to do it without alarming the whole waiting room. "Miss Calder," he said. "It's Reese," I said. "My husband's name is Reese. Joanna Reese." He nodded. "Judge Aldridge passed away this morning. The granola bar I'd eaten an hour ago made its presence known in my stomach. He had a medical event late last night," the Marshal continued. "Peaceful, at home. He had no surviving immediate family. His attorney called our office this morning because the judge left specific instructions." He reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket and produced an envelope, not cream-colored, not heavy stock, just a standard white envelope with my name written on it in that same cramped, deliberate handwriting I recognized from the letter 2 years ago. Inside was a single folded page, a note, and beneath it, a separate document on the letterhead of a law firm in Charlotte. The note said, "You held my hand at 2 in the morning when I was too far gone to hold anything myself. I want you to know that meant more than you are probably able to calculate." I've asked Marcus to explain the rest. The document was a notice of bequest. Warren Aldridge had amended his estate 6 months after our lunch at the diner. He'd left a portion of it. Enough to be significant, not enough to be life-changing in the way people mean when they say that, but significant. Split between the St. Caldwell ER Nursing Staff Endowment Fund and a personal bequest to me, with a letter of recommendation addressed to the board of the State Hospital Association, nominating me for the Lifetime Clinical Excellence Award. I stood at the front desk of the ER where I'd worked for 9 years, and I read that document 3 times. The waiting room was doing what waiting rooms do. A toddler was crying somewhere to my left. A man in a work jacket was filling out forms. The televisions mounted in the corner was on a home improvement channel with the sound off. I folded the papers, put them back in the envelope, tucked it into my scrub pocket, then I went back to work. I didn't tell anyone. I finished my shift. I drove home. Colton was in the kitchen making soup, the kind from scratch, not a can, with actual vegetables he'd chopped while I was gone, because that's the kind of person he is. He'd set the table without being asked. There was a cup of tea waiting for me, the right kind, the chamomile blend I only drink when I'm wrung out. He looked at me when I came in and read my face the way he reads faces for a living. "Rough one?" he said. "More like a full one," I said. He nodded, handed me the tea, sat down across from me while I told him about Warren Aldridge, all of it, the bus crash, the 2 hours and 40 minutes, the letter, the lunch at the diner, the bequest, the award nomination. I'd been carrying most of it alone for 2 years. Setting it down on our kitchen table in pieces while my husband listened without interrupting was one of the stranger reliefs I've ever experienced. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Why didn't you tell me about the bus crash? I didn't want you to worry." He looked at me steadily. "You spent 2 hours holding a stranger's chest closed and drove home in the dark and made coffee and let me leave for school. You had that parent-teacher conference." He shook his head slowly, not in frustration, in the particular way he does when something strikes him as both absurd and completely characteristic of a person he has chosen to love. My phone was on the counter. It buzzed. A text from my mother. "Sinclair says you didn't send a gift. Typical. I hope you and your school teacher are proud of yourselves." 2 days after that, I got a call from the State Nursing Association. The board had received Judge Aldridge's nomination letter. They wanted to discuss scheduling. The following month, the hospital administration received a letter from Holt Sutherland Capital Management, informing them that the ER Endowment Fund, the one that funded our equipment upgrades and continuing education budget, was receiving a significant contribution in Judge Aldridge's name, with a note attached naming me as the staff member whose care had prompted the original gift 3 years prior. My supervisor called me in again. This time, she had the department chief with her, and a PR coordinator from the hospital communications office, and a look on her face I'd never seen in 9 years of working for her. "Joanna," she said, "the board wants to know if you'd be willing to be recognized at the hospital gala in March." I said I'd think about it. I did think about it. I thought about it for 3 weeks while I worked my shifts and came home and ate dinner with Colton and listened to him talk about his students. The one who'd just qualified for the regional science fair, the one who'd read her first complete book and left it on his desk with a note that said thank you. I thought about my mother's text. I thought about the cream-colored envelope going down the garbage disposal. I thought about Sinclair's small smile. I called the hospital communications office and said yes. The gala was a black tie event at the convention center in Uptown Charlotte. 300 guests. Hospital board members, major donors, city officials, physicians from the surrounding health system. Colton wore his only suit, the one he'd bought for our wedding and had dry cleaned twice since. It still fit. He looked, objectively, like a man who has nothing to prove to anyone in any room he walks into, which is the most attractive quality I have ever encountered in another human being. My mother found out about the gala through my aunt. She called me 2 days before. "I heard about the hospital thing," she said. "I think it would be appropriate for the family to be there. Sinclair and Prescott are available Saturday. It would look good, Joanna. It would look like we're all united." "The tickets are allocated by the hospital," I said. "I have 2. They're for me and Colton." Silence. "Then, Sinclair is your sister. I know who she is. After everything we've done, I'll talk to you next week," I said, and hung up. The night of the gala, I wore a midnight blue dress I'd bought on sale at a department store in November and saved for something I didn't yet know I was saving it for. Colton picked it out of my closet when I couldn't decide and held it up with one eyebrow raised, the way he does when he's right and he knows it, and he's not going to make a thing of it. We walked in together. I'd been in that convention center for a nursing continuing education seminar 3 years prior. It had looked different with folding tables and overhead fluorescents. Under chandeliers, with the tables set and the room full of people who donated wings to hospitals, it looked like a different planet. The department chief found us at the entrance and walked us to the head table. I watched people register us. Colton's corduroy jacket that he'd swapped in at the last minute because the suit jacket had a spot on the lapel he'd missed. My department store dress, the way we held each other's hands the way people do when they've been holding hands long enough that it's not a gesture anymore, it's just the default position. Then the program director introduced Judge Aldridge's attorney, Marcus, the name from the letter, who stood at the podium and spoke for 8 minutes about Warren Aldridge's life and the choice he'd made about who to credit in his final bequest. He didn't editorialize, he just told the facts: the bus accident, the 26 months, the BLT at the diner, the instruction that a specific ER nurse be recognized by name. He said my name into a microphone in front of 300 people. The hospital board chair stood up first, then most of the room. I stood at that table in my sail rack dress with Colton's hand in mine, and I did not perform any of the emotions people perform in those moments. I didn't tear up and cover my mouth. I didn't look at the ceiling. I just held Colton's hand and looked straight ahead and let the noise wash over me. Because I'd spent 9 years doing the work in the dark, and what was happening right now was simply the moment when someone turned a light on, and all it showed was what had already been there. My mother found out the details the following morning. My aunt called her from the parking garage after the gala, apparently, before we'd even gotten to our car. I know this because my mother called me at 7:30 a.m. while I was making eggs. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. Her voice was a frequency I recognized, not quite contrite, not quite accusatory, trying to find the register between them that might still get her somewhere. "Joanna, this is a family matter. This reflects on all of us." "It reflects on the nursing staff at St. Caldwell," I said. "That's who the endowment is for. Don't be difficult." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Sinclair is very upset that she wasn't included." I flipped the eggs. They were getting the brown edges Colton likes. "Sinclair didn't want to be included," I said. "Sinclair wanted us not to come to her wedding. That's completely different." "How?" Silence. "Mom," I said, "I have to go to work." She texted me that afternoon. Then again that evening. Then 3 times over the weekend. The messages cycled through the same architecture: hurt, then blame, then a pivot to practical concern. What about the money? What does this mean for the family? Has Prescott heard anything from the Aldridge estate? Then back to hurt again. She asked twice if I could call Warren Aldridge's attorney to explain that the family had always been supportive. I didn't respond to any of them. Sinclair called once. I let it go to voicemail. In the message, she said she thought we should talk, that there had been misunderstandings on both sides, that she wanted to move forward. She used the phrase "move forward" 4 times in 90 seconds. She didn't mention the garbage disposal. She didn't mention the caption on the photo she'd sent during my shift. She said she hoped we could get past this. She said Prescott was interested in connecting with people at the hospital. She said she and Prescott had recently started talking about philanthropic giving. I stood in my kitchen and listened to the voicemail twice. Then I deleted it. What Sinclair didn't know, what she would find out 6 weeks later through the social infrastructure of our extended family, was that the law firm managing Judge Aldridge's estate had, at his specific written instruction, also notified the hospital foundation board that any donation made in the Aldridge name should go through the endowment committee, not through any individual petitioner, and that any party misrepresenting a relationship with the deceased judge would be referred to the estate's legal counsel. I didn't know this was in the instruction until Marcus told me over the phone in February. I didn't arrange it. I didn't ask for it. Warren Aldridge had simply, quietly, with the precision of a man who had spent 30 years on the federal bench, made sure that the people who tried to attach themselves to his gratitude after his death wouldn't be able to. He'd seen it happen before, he told me at the diner. He'd wanted to make sure it didn't happen this time. The night I found out, I told Colton over dinner. He was quiet for a moment, the way he gets when something lands right. "He knew," Colton said. "He knew what?" "He knew you'd never use any of it for leverage, so he did it for you." I looked at him across our table, the one with the scratch on the left corner where we'd moved it to get the sofa through the door 4 years ago, and never got around to sanding down. The crock pot was going on the counter. One of his students' drawings was stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a state of North Carolina. The overhead light needed a new bulb, and we kept forgetting to buy one. I thought about the toothed chairs at Sinclair's family table with our names on them. I thought about the garbage disposal. I thought about the BLT at the diner, and the coffee going cold, and the way Warren Aldridge had asked me how I got into nursing and listened to the whole answer. I thought about 26 months of carrying the bus crash quietly, and the 2 years of my mother's calls about orchid centerpieces, and Panthers box seats, and the irony, which was not poetic but simply true, that the man whose life I'd been credited with saving had done more to protect mine in death than the people who shared my blood had done in any year I could name. I reached across the table and took Colton's hand. The crooked finger, the wedding ring, the hand that had carried children out of classrooms, and graded 40 essays about admirable people, and never once asked anyone to notice. I didn't say anything. He didn't either. The crock pot bubbled. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked once and went quiet. I blocked my mother's number on a Tuesday morning before my shift, while I was sitting in the parking garage with the engine off and 5 minutes to spare. I did it the same way I remove a bandage. Fast, clean, no ceremony. I'd been a nurse long enough to know that hesitation doesn't reduce pain. It only prolongs it. Cutting someone out of your life who is supposed to love you is not something that comes with instructions or validation. Nobody gives you a form to sign. Nobody confirms it was the right call. You just make the decision and live inside it, and the first few days feel like a room where you've rearranged all the furniture and keep reaching for things that aren't where they used to be. What helped was the work. It always had. 3 months later, I accepted the Lifetime Clinical Excellence Award at the State Nursing Association's annual conference in Raleigh. Colton sat in the third row in the corduroy jacket. I gave a 2-minute speech. I thanked the St. Caldwell trauma team. I thanked the educators who trained me. I thanked my husband, specifically for being the kind of person who makes it possible to do hard things at 2 in the morning and come home afterward and believe the world is still worth showing up for. He was the only person in the third row who was crying. He will never admit this. My mother sent a card to the house afterward. She must have heard about it through my aunt. The card had a sunrise on the front and a printed verse about grace. Inside, she'd written, "I'm proud of you, sweetheart. I always have been. I hope we can talk soon." I held the card for a while. I thought about what she'd said about the scrubs, about Colton not having a real career, about Sinclair's fiancé's medical imaging clinics and the Panthers box, and what success is supposed to look like from the outside, when you're trying to make people at a dinner party believe a story you've been rehearsing for 20 years. I thought about what Warren Aldridge had said at the diner, about the people who save lives at 2 in the morning while the rest of the world is asleep. I set the card on the counter. I made coffee. Colton came downstairs and asked what it was. I told him. He read it, set it back down, poured his own coffee. "What do you want to do?" he said. I looked at him, at the crooked finger, at the scratch on the table corner, at the drawing on the refrigerator, at the coffee going warm between us. "I want to finish my coffee," I said. "And then I want to go to work." He raised his mug, I raised mine. The most powerful person in any room is never the one who spent the most money to get there. It's the one who knows exactly why they walked through the door.